From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie 300, released in 2006. And sometimes it's listed as being released in 2007. It stars Gerard Butler, Lena Headey, and Dominic West. Directed by Zack Snyder. The synopsis is: King Leonidas of Sparta and a force of 300 men fight the Persians at Thermopylae in 480 BC. The story. The film is based on the Battle of Thermopylae, fought between ancient Greek city-states led by King Leonidas I of Sparta and the Achaemenid Empire of Xerxes I in 480 BC. The extraordinary thing about this battle is that it stands out in the record books as a time that King Leonidas' men were only 300 strong, leading the battle with 7,000 Greeks in total fighting, and they faced off with King Xerxes' ranks of possibly 100,000 to 2 million fighters. The number is actually not really concrete, but either way, the fight should have really lasted only about 2 hours or maybe even 15 minutes, and that's pretty much well known that they were on a suicide mission. However, King Leonidas and his men lasted 3 full days, and that's pretty incredible. The battle was documented by Greek historian Herodotus, who was born 4 years after this battle in the Greek city of Halicarnassus, a part of the Persian Empire that's now Bodrum, Turkey. He wrote a detailed account of the Geo-Persian Wars, and he's also referred to as the father of history for his work. The story remained in the history books until it was turned into a film, The 300 Spartans, that was made in 1962 with the cooperation of the Greek government. When American comic book writer, penciler, and inker, novelist, screenwriter, film director, and producer Frank Miller saw The 300 Spartans in 1962 at 5 years old, he was fascinated by the quote-unquote perception of heroes that didn't always win and sometimes became heroes through self-sacrifice. It inspired him to write and illustrate the comic book series 300 in 1998 with painted colors by Lynn Varley, retelling the Battle of Thermopylae. A hardcover collection was also released in 1999. American film director, producer, screenwriter, and cinematographer Zack Snyder read the graphic novel and was inspired to make a film out of it. Zack Snyder got a team together and scanned Frank Miller's graphic novel into an animated version of the comic strip and hired Scott Glenn for a voice-over narration. Warner Brothers told him that they needed more convincing, so he shot a live-action 90-second, 360-degree continuous shot featuring a single Spartan killing several Persians. Unfortunately, it was not picked up by the studio right away, but Zack was hired to direct his first feature film, Dawn of the Dead, released in 2004. Producer Gianni Nunari was planning a film about the Battle of Thermopylae, and director Michael Mann was also planning a film of the battle based on the book Gates of Fire. When Gianni found out about Frank Miller's graphic novel, he acquired the rights to the film rather quickly. Gianni paired up with Mark Canton to produce the film and got Michael B. Gordon to write an initial script. As luck would have it, Zack Snyder was hired in June of 2004 and got screenwriter Kurt Johnstad to write the script for production. Frank Miller, who bonded with Zack over samurai and low-budget gory movies, was a consultant on the film and executive producer. The core army of 300 Spartans and King Leonidas fighting Xerxes was a frame for the story, but you don't find any historical accuracy in the film. In that respect, 300 Spartans 1962 was actually more true to the historical events as it was told by Herodotus, and even he had embellished the story from the start. Frank Miller was abundantly clear about making the comic book miniseries a flat-out fantasy and not a docudrama, exaggerating most of the story in favor of the Spartans even more. This is key and foremost to understanding this film. Not only was it a fantasy, it was specifically written from the sensationalized perspective of a Spartan. The film stayed pretty close to the comic book in theme and much of the dialogue. Now for the pacing. At an hour and 57 minutes, you would think that I would say that that's too long, but actually, no. I enjoyed every second of the film. The time didn't play a factor. Now the challenge. The challenge in this movie are the Persians, led by Xerxes. Ultimately, the 300 Spartans held off the Persian army for 3 days. The purpose was not to win the war, but to hold off the war and buy the Greeks more time. Before the last fatal battle, King Leonidas sends one of the surviving soldiers by the name of Dilios home, and the story that we're watching on screen is being told from his point of view to strum up more warriors to join the battle. It's pretty obvious because he tells the story of Leonidas' last moments with great detail, but he wasn't there to see it in the flesh. So his story is part truth and mostly imagination. I mention this because he takes a lot of liberties to make the enemy surreal and pure fantasy. The detail of his imagination is skewed to make the 300 appear stoic and the Persians appear to be twisted and evil. I'm sure if we had a tale written by Xerxes or someone in the Persian camps, the Greeks would be depicted as the evil ones, and in truth, they were much alike each other. Looking at depictions of Xerxes in various artworks, he looks a lot like the Greeks. In fact, it looks like King Leonidas stole his cool beard for the movie. And, the sequel to the movie, 300 Rise of an Empire, released in 2014, goes a little bit deeper into the fictional origin of Xerxes' life and how he transitioned from a normal-looking prince into an adorned, gold-skinned giant god king when his father died through magic. This version of Xerxes has conquered so many countries, and he and his entourage are inspired by a lot of different cultures, and actually thought that they looked really cool. The Immortals were a real part of this main 10,000-man infantry that were called the Immortals because when one fell, a soldier would appear in his place. They were pretty much super soldiers, and they were the fiercest soldiers out there. There were also other groups of special ops, if you want to call them, certain groups that would do different things during the battle. I completely enjoyed the detail of all the different kinds of soldiers and ranks, and it was very elaborate and fun to see. Xerxes himself is the representation of temptation. Within the Greeks, Xerxes has already bought loyalists that were willing to commit treason against their own people. He offers King Leonidas a bloodless way to surrender, and he offers the Spartan traitor Ephialtes the hunchback his every pleasure. Another point to note about Xerxes is his pride, vanity, arrogance, and lack of humanity. Most of all things, he hates to fail. And his background is that he comes from two world conquerors, his father Darius the Great and his grandfather Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire and the Achaemenid Empire. There's a lot of pressure for him to be as great of a military conqueror as his predecessors. Another piece of the story that's not in the film is that this is Xerxes' second battle. The first battle was 10 years earlier with his father Darius taking the lead then. The Persians didn't win as they thought they would, and so Xerxes worked for 10 years to build up his massive army, hoping that would ensure a victory. He mentions how he would sacrifice hundreds of his own men to achieve his goal. This is a great example of why he's a different leader to King Leonidas, because Leo would rather give his own life to sacrifice his men. These two are perfect oppositions to each other. Xerxes gets the upper hand over Leonidas through a character I mentioned before, Ephialtes. Ephialtes dreams of nothing but being a Spartan soldier and dying in battle. It is the greatest glory of a Spartan. He showed real passion following the 300 in hopes that he can join them. His deformity didn't pose a problem to Leonidas until sadly he discovered that Ephialtes couldn't raise his shield arm to fight in the battle in the Greeks' impenetrable fighting formation. The rejection breaks his heart to the point that he tries to commit suicide, poor thing. But it doesn't work, so he goes to Xerxes as an act of revenge against Leonidas, broken and vulnerable. He tells Xerxes about a small goat pass that the Persians can attack the Greeks from behind in exchange for becoming a general in his army. He's so sad, but and you just want to give him a big hug because he's been in a hurt place all of his life, not even being able to live out his dream. His motivation is completely understandable, and he even gets what he wants through Xerxes. But it's not enough because Leonidas tells him, "May you live forever," which is about the worst thing you can say to a Spartan because they are taught that death on the battlefield in service to Sparta is the greatest accomplishment and the greatest glory that a Spartan can achieve in his life. It was actually the worst insult, and I definitely felt sorry for him by the end. Love the challenges in the story. Now for the empathy, and we'll start off with the character of Dilius, who is telling the story to muster up the next wave of soldiers to fight Xerxes. He was modeled after the actual historical figure of Aristodemus, who was the sole Spartan survivor of the Battle of Thermopylae. He was dismissed by Leonidas because he had an eye infection. But what's really surprising is that he was actually considered to be a coward by the Spartans until he redeemed himself fighting and dying in the Battle of Plataea a year later, partially blind. Poor guy. Dilius tells the story of the way of the Spartans, who he calls the greatest soldiers the world has ever known. All Spartan babies are inspected, and any children born with visible defects are thrown into a pit of discarded, decomposing infants that didn't meet their standards. As soon as young boys learn how to stand, they are baptized in the fire of combat. At the age of 7, they are taken from the home and trained, but it's more like they go through an abusive initiation until they show no feelings of pain and use PTSD trauma to survive no matter what. They force them to fight each other, starve them, teach them to steal without getting caught, kill each other if necessary, beaten with rods and whips to grow tougher, and are constantly tested. In reality, this training did exist, but royal children didn't have to go through this training. Because Leonidas was the third in line to the throne, he was one of the very few Spartan kings to train as a Spartan soldier. His brothers both fled Sparta for separate reasons, and he became king. Leonidas is presented to us in the film as a man of high standards and a man willing to die for his people. His honor is his motivation for everything. It is easy to just constantly show him as a confident character, but he's actually more contemplative about everything he does. And he doesn't always get it right. To his fault, he fails in his handling of Ephialtes. Whatever he decides, he must stand by it with a bold fierceness. An example of that is when the enemy demands that the Spartans surrender their weapons, he replies, "Come and get them." By the way, the real Leonidas actually did say that. He could be mischaracterized as being a warmonger and ready to fight for the sake of fighting, but he's not. I love the way the film portrays him as he is in serious thought about his responsibility for his men who have chosen to join him in this suicide mission, which weighs heavily on him. There is no joy in this ride. The most important person to him is his wife, Queen Gorgo. The real Queen Gorgo was the daughter of Leonidas' half-brother, Cleomenes, which made her his niece. Yuck. It puts a different spin on the relationship. But in this age, it was normal. Their marriage was probably necessary to ensure the throne's legitimacy, as many ancient marriages were. The Spartan women were different from other women in that time in the way that they had more rights and were more equal to men. They got pretty much the same education and went through the same physical fitness regimen growing up. However, they were spared the intense Spartan soldier training. They had to run things while their men were away at war. Motherhood was their pride, to the point that the line where Queen Gorgo defends her right to speak among men, she says, because only Spartan women give birth to real men. This was something that the real Gorgo said. Another rumor about the Spartan women is that they wear the pants in their households. And although King Leonidas doesn't play a lesser role, he trusts his wife and her opinions in all things. Before finally making his decisions to start the war, he glances at Gorgo, who then gives him the nod to proceed. I love the closeness and the silent communication between the two of them. It's one of my favorite parts of the film. She is clearly a tough lady. When he leaves for war, she says, "Come back with your shield or on it," which is a common phrase by Spartan women to their sons and husbands. Dead soldiers were carried home on their shields. Cowards on the battlefield would return home without their shields. So what she's actually saying is that she'd rather for him to come home dead than to come home a coward. That's a lot to live up to, and Leonidas straightens up a little before he walks off, and wow, I can't even explain how powerful that is. In many ways, war is so ingrained into their culture that King Leonidas has no choice but to be who he is. Many people did express that they didn't enjoy the subplot between Queen Gorgo lobbying for more soldiers to fight the war. I'm the opposite. Of course, I was completely uncomfortable seeing her deal with the treacherous Senator Theron. But the payoff for her revenge was excellent. And I love that she was not just idle, but was actually doing her part to assist her husband and her country. They were true partners in this war. Now, of the 300 Spartans, there were a few that stands out. Captain Artemis was one of my favorites. He was King Leonidas' right-hand man and his kind of bestie, I guess you would call him, at least in the context of this film. He brought so much energy to the scenes that he's in, and pretty much everybody did. His dedication to Sparta is incredible, willing to sacrifice his son, Astinos, coldly, he says. He has other sons, but he is so lovingly looking after his son during this entire exposition. Asino is younger than most of the Spartans, but he's excited to fight by his father's side and impress him. It breaks your heart when he dies because everyone knew it was a suicide mission and the stakes are high. Artemis loses his mind when Astino dies, so even though he was so dismissive of his son, possibly even dying in the war at the beginning of the film, he loves his son so very deeply. Astinos becomes buddies with Stelios, who is an overzealous and loyal to the cause. The two of them have a dynamic fighting scene that is shot in glorious slow motion. Stelios has several memorable scenes and delivers a few famous lines in the film. One is, after hearing that the enemy's arrows will blot out the sky, he says, "Then we'll fight in the shade." This is an actual line from a real Spartan warrior, Dionysius. Now the technical aspect. The technical aspects of the film is the real standout. So much that people are in total awe of it and sometimes forget that there's actually a story being told. The main fascination about the film is how it bears the aesthetic of the source comic book series. It was filmed on a soundstage painted with a background of either blue about 90% of the time and green 10% of the time in Montreal, and the background was chroma keyed into the shot to create the entire look. Blue was most often used because the red in the Spartan capes looked better in the finished product. To look like the soundstage was shooting at different locations, utilizing various angles were employed. In total, it took 60 days to film everything. Some of the scenes in the film were incredibly amazing. Not only do they look like the comic, they look like something from a dream. This stylistic look is so awe-inspiring and so groundbreaking that it transcends time. It was easily one of the main reasons this film is so unforgettably arresting. It's regarded as one of the most influential stylistic films of the early 2000s. The film is notorious for the use of slow motion, part of the reason the film feels so epic, so grand, giving every moment that is slowed down a powerful impact, defining a moment for the characters, and then the film speeds up to join to normal speed. It's an extraordinary style that adds another layer to the storytelling. When Leonidas screams at the end of the film in slow motion, he is screaming in defiance of his doomed fate. And although dying in the battle is the ultimate wish for the Spartan soldier, he wants to live, and he will die fighting with his last breath. It sucks you into his emotions completely. Another aspect of the film that captures the imagination is the costumes and the character design used in the film. It took a crew of over 60 people who worked on about 600 costumes. Gerard Butler, the actor who played King Leonidas, had 17 plumed helmets made for him, each representing a stage of degradation throughout the battle. Although all of the Spartan soldiers wore helmets with plumes in real life, it was decided not to give the plumes to the other Spartans in the film to visually set King Leonidas apart from the rest. I think it was a great idea. A subtle change that works brilliantly. The film saved money on weapons for the film by recycling some of the weapons used in Alexander that was filmed in 2004 and Troy, released also in that year. Most of the swords used in this movie were plastic. They looked realistic, which is not totally easy to do without skills to age them and handle them realistically. The film is mostly bloodless, which I actually thought was a plus, as not to focus on the gore. Only 2 gallons of fake blood was used in total, as well as some computer animated splatters that filled out the effects. The rest was added in post-production. It's important to note that the film only cost $65 million, so the visual result is absolutely astounding. Tyler Bates created the epic score that he recorded at Abbey Road Studios, featuring the vocals of Azam Ali. However, the score was acknowledged by Warner Brothers that it was too similar to James Horner and Gabriel Yared's work on the film Troy and Elliot Goldenthal's work in Titus, released in 1999. They said a number of the music cues for the score of 300 were, without our knowledge or participation, derived from music composed by Academy-winning composer Elliot Goldenthal for the motion picture Titus. Warner Brothers Pictures has a great respect for Elliot, our longtime collaborator, and is pleased to amicably solve this matter. This was generally considered accidental on the part of Tyler because he's composed scores for movies like Slither, Dawn of the Dead, Get Carter. As well, he went on to compose Halloween in 2007, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and a lot of amazing movies, Guardians of the Galaxy, John Wick, Atomic Blonde, but specifically with this score. It fits the visuals like a glove, but it also enhances every moment into an unforgettable event. If you weren't sure that the film was epic, well, the music verifies it for you with an official stamp of epicness. Now the performances. The Spartans and some of the other characters were all bare-chested, and so all of the actors had to undergo a rigorous 8-week training by Mark Twight, a professional mountain climber, in which actors never repeated the same exercise twice to stress their muscles. In order to bond with his actors, Zack Snyder also underwent the same training. Gerard Butler, who played King Leonidas, was perfect casting, and he had so much dedication to the project. He spent 4 hours a day for over 4 months to get into shape for the role and suffered many injuries that developed a painkiller addiction for a while. I think it's easy to say that he was hamming it up, but there's also a nuance to his performance. Acting acting with his heart and soul as a man who knows that he is going to die. He puts his heart and soul into each speech, and he was the heart of the film's success. Lena Headey was fantastic as Queen Gorgo, giving us a strong female protagonist. Her entire subplot was created for the film and not part of the comic. I thought it was a wonderful addition that I fully enjoyed, and I'm so glad that they didn't waste Lena's talent in the film by making her a simple bystander. She's one of our heavies, and wow, she really shows her stuff in this film. Rodrigo Santoro came to the project for the role of Astinos. Zack Snyder saw something in his audition and felt he would be perfect for the part of Xerxes. Although there wasn't really much screen time and story depth for the character, Rodrigo played him with a certain nuance, showing off attributes like arrogance, narcissism, pride, and cruelty, and what little he had to work with. It impressed me how much he did to portray for the character with his physicality. He said that he used Yul Brynner's performance in The King and I, released in 1956, as his inspiration, and you can see that on screen. This film was Michael Fassbender's first feature film, and so it's a little strange seeing him in a film where he's not the main character or main supporting character. Every time he's on screen, he just kills it. He's just giving this performance so much energy and at times inserting so much levity to the film. Oh my God, he was wonderful. And everyone did a fantastic job bringing the world of 300 to epic life. Now the enjoyment. A small portion of the film was showed on July 2006 at the Comic-Con convention in San Diego in order to generate buzz for the film, and it worked brilliantly. The attendees requested to view it 3 times, and then the trailer was leaked on the internet. When looking up this movie, there's a discrepancy whether or not the movie was released in 2006 or 2007, and that is because an unfinished cut of 300 was shown at the Butt-Nomathon Film Festival on December 9th in 2006. The actual official release date was March 9th in 2007. At the time it was released, it was the highest grossing R-rated comic book film ever made until the release of Deadpool in 2016, and it had the 24th biggest box office opening in history. It was a huge success at the time, with everyone repeatedly shouting King Leonidas, quote, "This is Sparta!" It was great. There were so many parody YouTube videos and even movies that were hilariously poking a little fun at the flick, and it became a phenomenon. It is said that even directors like James Cameron were big fans of the film and its groundbreaking use of visuals to tell the story. In 2014, 300, The Rise of an Empire was released, and many of the returning surviving characters returned, directed by Noam Muro. Actually, this film is not my type of film. I'm not actually a fan of war movies. When this film was released, I avoided it like the plague. I wasn't having any of it. And I think it was about 2012 when I first saw it, and I was blown away that this was nothing like I expected. But instead, by the way the film was shot, I felt as if I was part of the Spartan army and Leonidas was speaking directly to me, getting me ready for battle. It was so intense, and I loved every minute of it. I also had a lot of fun with the story aspect. It wasn't just about the visual action and the bombastic speeches or the repeatable quotes. The story of sacrifice and love is so powerful that I was completely teary-eyed by the end. Stilios says, "I am honored to die by your side." And Leonidas then replies, "I am honored to have lived by yours." And oh my God, that's when the tears just flow. At that moment, Leonidas appreciated life, and it reminds me of the last moments of Roy Batty in Blade Runner, released in 1982, where he also too kind of respects life, and it's just beautiful. I just think this film is brilliant from a storytelling standpoint, and I just love the way it made me feel. My rating is a 9.7. Well, that sums up my review. I hope you liked it, and if you did, I have over 100 of these videos, so go on ahead and browse the channel to see more reviews from me like this. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to be notified of my next video. I want to take this moment to recognize my wonderful Patreon supporters who are responsible for helping me produce this video. Many thanks to these incredible movie lovers for their support, and you too can make a difference by heading over to Patreon and get a little bit of behind the scenes stuff from me that you don't really get from me on my regular videos on YouTube. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.